Marvin awoke to the buzzing hum of the celestial office, a sound that was neither bothersome nor comforting, just profoundly inevitable. His small cubicle was nestled between towering stacks of glowing paperwork and humming filing cabinets that occasionally exhaled faint puffs of stardust. The department he worked in, officially named the Department of Accidental Miracles, was a place where the divine met the mundane in the most absurd manner possible. He adjusted his ill-fitting celestial blazer, a faded azure that looked like it had seen several millennia of use, and tried to push his spectacles back up the bridge of his nose. The spectacles, a relic from some ancient heavenly decree, had a tendency to slide down whenever he grew nervous, which was often. Today, nerves were especially present. The morning meeting had been cancelled, which meant no immediate guidance, and the paperwork was piling higher than ever. Marvin sighed, a soft sound that mingled with the gentle clatter of angelic footsteps and the distant flutter of wings. The office was alive with the quiet diligence of countless clerks, each attending to their own stack of miraculous applications, prayers, and divine petitions. The air smelled faintly of old parchment, though no paper was actually used here, and a hint of celestial incense that was supposed to promote efficiency, but mostly just made Marvin sneeze. He opened the thick manual titled Divine Miracle Protocols and squinted at the dense text. The rules were labyrinthine, a tangle of regulations intended to impose order on what was fundamentally an unpredictable business. Yet here he was, a low-ranking clerk, charged with the task of reviewing miracle forms and approving them with the utmost care. Failure was not an option. Or so he thought. Across the room, Tina, a fellow clerk known for her sharp tongue and quicker wit, threw him a look that was equal parts skepticism and pity. "You're still on Form 27B, that's ancient history," she muttered, tapping her own stack of glowing forms with a manicured finger. "Try not to accidentally bless the wrong Bob this time, Marvin." Her voice was dry, but there was a hint of encouragement underneath. Marvin swallowed the lump of anxiety forming in his throat and returned to his task. His fingers trembled ever so slightly as he sorted through the endless stream of miraculous requests, some urgent, some trivial, and some downright baffling. He double-checked each name, each request for healing, hope, or happiness. The approved stamp, a glowing sigil that sealed the miracle's fate, sat heavy on his desk, waiting. Then it happened. A momentary lapse, a slip of the hand, a misread name, and the stamp descended on the wrong set of forms. A small burst of sparkling light erupted, momentarily illuminating the otherwise dim office. The clerks nearby paused, their expressions flickering between surprise and mild alarm. The ripple of chaos was subtle at first, a flutter in the orderly filing system. But it was enough. Across the city on Earth, a struggling artist named Ella was about to experience a sudden and inexplicable turn of fortune. A withered plant on her windowsill bloomed overnight into a radiant flower. Her paintbrush began to move with uncanny inspiration, and a series of small but fortuitous events nudged her life forward. Meanwhile, elsewhere, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dunlop found herself humming a tune she hadn't heard in decades, her loneliness alleviated by a visitor who claimed to be an old friend lost to time. Back in the celestial office, Marvin's heart pounded as he realized the magnitude of his error. Gabriel, his supervisor, approached with a tall frame and a knowing smile, his robe slightly rumpled from the eternal wear of office politics. "Marvin," he said gently, "sometimes the bureaucracy of heaven is less about strict order and more about the unexpected. Perhaps these mistakes are miracles in disguise." Marvin blinked, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. The day had only just begun, and the paperwork was infinite. Yet beneath the layers of heavenly red tape and celestial regulations, something new was stirring, a chaotic kindness that no manual could predict. As the office buzzed on, the first signs of chaos began to unfurl in the quiet corners of earth and heaven alike. And Marvin, the accidental agent of divine disorder, braced himself for the consequences, both bureaucratic and cosmic, that awaited. Marvin stared at the mountain of forms before him, a labyrinth of celestial paperwork that seemed to multiply every time he blinked. Department of Accidental Miracles, as it was unofficially known among the few who dared joke about it, had become a chaotic mess since his initial blunder. The forms were stamped, annotated, and restamped with various celestial seals, but none seemed to align with the actual miracle grants that had slipped through his distracted fingers. He adjusted his spectacles, which had begun a slow descent down his nose, and muttered a resigned, "Not again," under his breath. Around him, the humming of ethereal printers and the low murmur of angelic clerks filled the air. A soundtrack of bureaucracy that clashed hilariously with the divine nature of their work. It was, in every way, an office like no other, not because of the miracles, but because of how utterly mundane the process had become. His first attempt to correct the paperwork was to retrace the approvals, but that only unearthed a new problem. Some miracles had already been activated on Earth, their effects tangibly rippling through human lives. One form, meant for a struggling artist named Ella, had been mistakenly attached to a rather grumpy retired librarian in a small town. Another miracle, intended to ease the burdens of a young mother, had instead landed with an elderly woman named Mrs. Dunlop, whose quiet life was suddenly brightened in ways no one expected. Marvin sighed deeply and reached for the celestial intercom. "Tina," he called out, hoping his sharp-tongued colleague would answer. Moments later, she appeared, arms crossed and eyebrow raised. "What now, Marvin?" "Lost in the paperwork again?" she asked, voice dripping with irritation but laced with a trace of concern. "It's more complicated than that," Marvin admitted, pushing a sheaf of forms toward her. "The miracles have. Well, they've gone to the wrong people. And now they're redoing strange things on Earth. I'm trying to sort it out before the supervisors catch wind." Tina snorted. "Good luck with that. You read the reason Harold's been breathing down our necks about budgets and unauthorized miracle expenditures." Marvin winced. Harold from the finance department was a relentless force, obsessed with numbers and audits, the embodiment of celestial fiscal responsibility. If anyone could ruin his day, it was Harold. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ella was sitting in her small, paint-splattered studio, staring at her canvas in disbelief. The miracle that had found her was subtle, but unmistakable, a sudden burst of creativity and inspiration that seemed almost otherworldly. Colors she had never imagined flowed from her brush, capturing emotions she hadn't dared to express. Despite her skepticism about religion and miracles, a cautious hope stirred within her. Back at the office, Gabriel, Marvin's supervisor, watched the unfolding chaos with a calm, slightly amused expression. His rumpled robe and knowing smile suggested a wisdom born of centuries navigating the quirks of the celestial bureaucracy. "Marvin," he said gently as he approached, "sometimes miracles don't follow the rules. They're messy, unpredictable. Perhaps this is a lesson for us all." Marvin looked up, panic giving way to a flicker of understanding. "But the paperwork," Gabriel chuckled softly. "The paperwork will never be perfect. Neither are miracles." As Marvin wrestled with his guilt and growing confusion, the humans affected by the accidental miracles began to experience their blessings in unexpected ways. Mrs. Dunlop, the elderly recipient, found a renewed vigor that inspired her to reconnect with old friends and community events, spreading quiet joy that baffled her neighbors. In the celestial office, discussions grew heated as supervisors debated how to handle the surge of unauthorized miracles. Harold's warnings about bankruptcy echoed ominously, while Marvin's repeated attempts to fix the errors only tangled the web further. Tina, watching Marvin's flustered efforts, felt a grudging sympathy blooming. Despite her sharp words, she admired his dedication and the strange, unintended good his mistakes had wrought. The chapter closed with Marvin sitting back at his desk, a stack of forms still looming, his mind racing. The chaos was far from over, and the question lingered in the air: could order and compassion coexist in a system so reliant on rules? Outside, the soft glow of a minor miracle illuminated Ella's painting, a silent testament to the unpredictable beauty that could emerge from cosmic errors. And Marvin, with a deep breath, prepared to dive back into the paperwork, ready to face whatever divine confusion awaited him next. The day began like any other in the celestial bureaucracy, but it quickly morphed into a crisis that would unsettle even the most serene angelic offices. Harold, the celestial finance officer, was already pacing in his cramped corner of the Department of Accidental Miracles, his sharp eyes glued to the stacks of ledgers piled higher than the clouds outside the office windows. Numbers danced and jumbled in his mind, each unauthorized miracle adding an unbearable weight to the celestial treasury. He muttered to himself, the faint ticking of the celestial clock, marking the relentless passage of time. "This can't go on," Harold hissed under his breath, tapping his ledger with an urgency that echoed through the otherwise quiet office. The recent surge in miracles granting blessings to the wrong people had turned the celestial budget into a bottomless pit. Heaven was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Harold was the first to sound the alarm. Marvin sat at his desk, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he nervously shuffled through an ever-growing mountain of paperwork. Each form was a testament to his blundering efforts to correct earlier mistakes, and each one seemed to spawn 2 more errors in its wake. He could feel the weight of impending doom pressing down on his mild-mannered shoulders, his anxious muttering barely audible over the hum of the office. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the department creaked open with a dramatic groan that silenced the room. A cold, sharp presence swept in like a winter wind. The auditor had arrived. She was the embodiment of order and severity, her sharp eyes scanning the room with a disapproving glare that made even the most seasoned clerks stiffen in their seats. In one hand, she carried her infamous ledger, its cover worn but formidable, and in the other, an air of unyielding judgment. "Good morning," she said, her voice as cold and precise as a scalpel. "I trust you all understand the gravity of the situation." Marvin swallowed hard, his heart pounding as the room seemed to shrink around him. He glanced at Gabriel, his supervisor, who stood nearby with a calm but watchful gaze. Gabriel's slightly rumpled robe and knowing smile were a small comfort in the storm of disapproval. "Marvin," the auditor continued, fixing him with a glare, "your department's recent activities have triggered an unprecedented financial crisis. Unauthorized miracles are flooding through the system, and the celestial treasury is hemorrhaging resources." Harold stepped forward, his neat fingers gripping the ledger like a lifeline. "If this continues, the entire heavenly administration will face insolvency. We need immediate reforms and strict enforcement of protocols." Marvin's fingers trembled as he tried to explain. "I never intended for this to happen. The errors were accidental. I've been trying to correct them, but it seems the more I try, the worse it gets." The auditor's lips tightened into a thin line. "Intentions matter little in the face of such reckless mismanagement. There will be consequences." Gabriel raised a hand, his voice smooth and measured. "Perhaps there's room to consider the unintended benefits these miracles have brought. Chaos, after all, can sometimes reveal unexpected truths." The auditor's glare softened just slightly, but the tension in the room remained palpable. Marvin felt torn between fear and a flicker of hope. The celestial bureaucracy was on the edge, and the coming days would demand more than mere clerical diligence. They would require courage, compassion, and perhaps a radical rethinking of what miracles truly meant. As the meeting adjourned, the office buzzed with nervous energy. Harold returned to his ledgers, muttering about budgets and audits. Tina shot Marvin a look that was part skepticism, part sympathy. Gabriel placed a reassuring hand on Marvin's shoulder, his smile hinting at the long journey still ahead. Outside the office windows, the faint sound of distant hymns mingled with the chaotic ripple of miracles cascading through the world below, a reminder that even amidst strict order, the unpredictable dance of divine error and human resilience was far from over. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the celestial bureaucracy, The first whispers of rebellion against rigid control took root. The auditor had arrived, but so had the promise of unexpected change. The audit loomed large, the stakes were higher than ever, and Marvin's accidental miracles were about to rewrite the rules of heaven itself. What would happen when order clashed with chaos in the very heart of the divine? Marvin had no choice but to find out. Ella never believed in miracles. Not really. To her, they were the stuff of fairy tales and desperate prayers whispered into the void, never meant to be answered. Yet there she was, sitting cross-legged on the worn wooden floor of her tiny studio apartment, eyes fixed on a cluster of wildflowers sprouting inexplicably from a crack in the floorboards. She blinked, half expecting the strange sight to vanish like a trick of the light, but the blossoms remained vivid and fragrant, their colors so bright they seemed almost otherworldly. This was the sort of thing that shouldn't happen to someone like Ella. A struggling artist in a small town, she fought daily battles with blank canvases, dwindling inspiration, and a skepticism that had hardened over years of disappointment. Her paint-splattered clothes and perpetually ink-stained fingers were testament to her relentless pursuit of expression, even when the world felt indifferent. Yet this morning, as the wildflowers danced gently in a breeze she couldn't feel, something had shifted. Ella crouched to touch the petals, half expecting dirt to crumble beneath her fingers, but the floor was solid and old. Well, she muttered, "If that's not the oddest thing I've seen," her voice tinged with both amusement and disbelief. Her gaze drifted to the window where sunlight spilled carelessly, bathing the room in a golden glow that seemed unusually warm. Outside, the town hummed with its usual rhythm, vendors calling out their wares, children chasing each other with laughter rippling like a melody, and the distant bark of a dog that sounded somehow less lonely today. Ella grabbed her sketchbook, worn and bristling with pages of half-formed dreams, and headed to the market, curiosity nudging her forward. The market was alive with color and sound. Stalls draped in cloths of every hue overflowed with fruits, vegetables, and handcrafted trinkets. Ella found a quiet corner, her fingers deftly capturing the scene onto paper, when a sudden shimmer caught her eye. Above the crowd, tiny lights twinkled and drifted lazily, harmless, ethereal sparks that neither frightened nor disturbed. Children paused mid-play, their faces lifted skyward, eyes wide with wonder and delight. Ella's lips twitched into a smile. "Okay, that's new," she whispered, her skepticism softening. She watched as the lights wove intricate patterns, a celestial dance of light that seemed to bless the mundane with magic. No one knew where they came from, and no one could explain them, yet their effect was undeniable. Days passed, and the miracles continued in subtle ways. A stray cat, usually shy and elusive, began to follow Ella home, weaving between her legs and rubbing its head against her in quiet affection. Her once empty mailbox now held letters of encouragement from strangers inspired by her art. The wildflowers in her studio thrived, and her canvases began to burst with color and emotion she hadn't known she possessed. Each blessing was a thread weaving through the fabric of her life, stitching together moments of joy and hope where once there had been only frustration and solitude. Ella told no one about the miracles, not because she doubted their origin, but because she wasn't sure she wanted to explain them. They felt private, sacred even, little sparks of wonder in a world too often dull and harsh. One afternoon, in the sunlit park at the edge of town, Ella found herself surrounded by a small group of curious onlookers. She shared her sketches and stories, her voice steady but infused with newfound strength. The accidental miracles, she explained, had opened her eyes to the beauty in imperfection and the unexpected kindness born from chaos. Among the crowd, faces lit with recognition and hope. In their eyes, Ella saw reflections of her own journey from skepticism to cautious belief, from isolation to connection. The miracles had done more than change her life. They had begun to transform the community, knitting strangers together with threads of shared wonder. Back in the department of accidental miracles, Marvin sat at his cluttered desk, spectacles slipping down his nose as he muttered ironic commentary about the consequences of his fumbled paperwork. Unaware of the full impact of his errors, he could scarcely imagine the ripples spreading across Earth, touching lives like Ella's in ways that defied the cold logic of celestial bureaucracy. Ella's story was a testament to the unpredictable beauty of divine mistakes, a reminder that sometimes the most profound miracles arise not from perfection, but from chaos woven with compassion. And as the wildflowers outside her window swayed in silent applause, Ella dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, miracles were real after all. But the question lingered in the air, unspoken yet persistent. How would this fragile hope endure the inevitable tides of order and control looming on the horizon? As the celestial machinery churned and the auditor's shadow lengthened, Ella's journey was only beginning. Her unlikely blessings, a quiet rebellion against a universe desperate for certainty. And somewhere in the vast corridors of heaven's bureaucracy, the gears of fate clicked uncertainly, waiting to see what would come next. Marvin's day began like any other in the vast, humming halls of the Department of Accidental Miracles, a place where the divine was as mundane as an office cubicle, and the stakes were as high as the stacks of paperwork threatening to avalanche onto the floor. This morning, however, the mountain of forms seemed particularly uncooperative. As he settled into his ill-fitting celestial office attire, the sleeves of his robe bunching awkwardly at the elbows, Marvin adjusted his spectacles with a nervous hand. They had slipped down his nose again, and with trembling fingers, he pushed them back up, muttering an ironic commentary about the futility of order in a place built on cosmic chaos. The first sign of trouble had come a few days ago when Marvin, in his usual attempt to be thorough, had fumbled the filing of several miracle requests. Instead of redirecting blessings to their rightful recipients, he had inadvertently granted them to unsuspecting humans who had never petitioned the heavens. At first, he had hoped to quietly correct the mistake, but each attempt to undo the blunder seemed to multiply the problem exponentially. Today, the consequences were painfully tangible. The glowing forms, stamped with seals that gleamed with an otherworldly light, were stacked precariously around his desk. Some fluttered like restless birds, others shimmered with a faint golden aura, waiting to be processed. The celestial printers chattered incessantly, spewing out more paperwork as if the bureaucracy itself was conspiring to drown him. Marvin, a sharp voice cut through the din. Tina, his sharp-tongued colleague, had appeared at his cubicle wall, arms crossed and brow furrowed. Her efficiency was legendary in the department, and her skepticism about Marvin's competence was an open secret. Another misfiled miracle. Really? He looked up, startled, his spectacles slipping again. "I'm trying to fix it," he said lamely, pushing a particularly stubborn form toward her. "I think this one was meant for Mrs. Dunlop, not some random artist in a small town." Tina snorted, eyes scanning the document. "You think? You don't know?" "Because the last time I checked, thinking wasn't part of the process here. We follow the forms," Marvin sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I know. But sometimes the forms don't make sense. Sometimes mistakes happen." "Mistakes?" Tina echoed, but her tone held a softness beneath the sarcasm. "You were a walking one, Marvin, but I suppose even walking mistakes can have value." Before he could respond, a sudden gust, some inexplicable celestial breeze whisked through the office, lifting a stack of forms into the air. They scattered like glowing birds, swirling and stamping themselves erratically as they floated, causing clerks nearby to duck and scramble. The chaos was spectacular, a tangible manifestation of the disorder that Marvin's errors had unleashed. "Great," Marvin muttered, diving to catch the nearest form before it could vanish into the ether. "Just great." Tina shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You really are something else, you know that." Later, as the afternoon sun filtered through the celestial windows, casting soft light on the endless rows of desks, Marvin found himself by the heavenly water cooler. Tina was already there, filling a cup with something that glittered faintly in the light. "Look," she said quietly, "I'm not going to lie. You rear pain in the hallow. But maybe, just maybe, there's something about the chaos you causing that's worth it." Marvin blinked, surprised by the rare show of kindness. "You really think so?" "I do," Tina replied, handing him a cup. "Just don't tell anyone I said that." As they sipped their drinks, the office buzzed around them, a strange harmony of order and chaos. Marvin felt a flicker of hope amid the paperwork mountain and the mounting errors. Perhaps, in the midst of divine mistakes and bureaucratic blunders, there was a kind of compassion waiting to be found. The next hours would test that hope. More missallocated miracles would surface, more forms would flutter and fly, and the department would teeter on the brink of administrative meltdown. But for the first time, Marvin knew he wasn't entirely alone in the chaos. Tina's quiet support was a small beacon, a reminder that even in the most absurd corners of heaven, unexpected alliances could form. And as the celestial printers hummed their relentless song, and the glowing papers danced in the air, Marvin prepared himself to face whatever mess the day would bring next, because in the department of accidental miracles, the only certainty was that chaos was the new order. The question remained, could chaos, with all its flaws and fumbling, truly be a force for good? Or was Marvin's well-meaning mess destined to unravel the very fabric of heavenly administration? Only time and a mountain of paperwork would tell.